Appreciate you joining us again. It is March 21st. Our reading today comes from both Deuteronomy as well as Psalms. To go ahead and get over there, and it's Deuteronomy 31, right at the tail end, and it's what is referred to as the Song of Moses. Verse 30, Then Moses spoke in the hearing of all the assembly of Israel the words of this song until they were ended. And then it's chapter 32. And let's just read for a moment. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Let my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew. Pardon me, as raindrops on the tender herb, and as showers on the grass. For I proclaim the name of the Lord. Ascribe greatness to our God. He is the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, a God of truth, and without injustice. Righteous and upright is he. They have corrupted themselves. They are not his children. Because of their blemish, a perverse and crooked generation. This song, as it is, comes right before the account in chapter 34. Chapter 34, and I tell you what, chapter 34 is the death of Moses. So we see when this is. We know Moses is going to go up on Mount Nebo, and we'll actually speak more about that in our next study. But this is at the end of Moses' life. And what that means is, this is pretty much at the tail end of their wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And I wanted to mention that just so we could contemplate. We know what happened in the wilderness over those 40 years. A whole generation of Israel is gone. They're dead. They died in the wilderness because of their lack of faith, because of their lack of obedience. And we look over in Psalm, the reading that goes along with our reading in Deuteronomy, in Psalm, and it's the 90th Psalm, I believe. Yeah. And to just look at that, in Psalm 90, where you have this prayer of Moses, and it's where we have the phrase, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And I hope I was just thinking about Moses at the end of his life, saying this, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Return, O Lord, how long, and have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us early with your mercy, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad according to the days in which you have afflicted us, the years in which we have seen evil. I think a little bit earlier, look up at verse 7. For we have been consumed by your anger, and by your wrath we are terrified. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your countenance. For all our days have passed away in your wrath. We finish our years like a sigh. And just that language there I thought was extremely powerful. Verse 11, who knows the power of your anger? For as the fear of you, so is your wrath. So teach us to number our days. Come back to Deuteronomy now. Within Deuteronomy chapter 32, you have this picture, and it's verse 4, he is the rock. And that's what he is, that he is the rock. He is the rock of our refuge, and we come to him. But the rock, the metaphor for the rock is used throughout this chapter, and I wanted you to see it, because it starts with, he is our rock. But then he goes on, and look down in verse 13. In talking about how the Lord had dealt with his people, verse 11, as an eagle stirs up its nest, hovers over its young, spreading out its wings, taking them up, carrying them on its wings. So the Lord alone led him, and there was no foreign God with him. Talking about the Lord with his people. Verse 13, he made him ride he made him ride in the heights of the earth, that he might eat the produce of the fields. He made him draw honey from the rock, and oil from the flinty rock. And it's the picture of the Lord's goodness. How do you get honey from a rock? It's a picture of the Lord's goodness. It's a picture of the Lord's blessings. God is the giver of all good and perfect things. And even in the wilderness, the Lord took care of them. They drank from the rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. He fed them with manna. Their clothing didn't wear out. They didn't suffer miscarriages. The Lord had blessed them. The Lord had blessed them with goodness, honey from the rock, oil from the flinty rock. The Lord's the giver of things that are good and perfect, but God is also just. God is righteous. And let's get back to our passage, because He is the rock. He does give goodness. But then we look a little bit later in verse 15, but Jeshurun, and my references say that word means something along the lines of upright, and it's talking about Israel. They grew fat and they kicked. They grew fat. He says, but Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, you grew thick, you are obese. And then he forsook God who made him and scornfully esteemed the rock of his salvation. And that's what they did. Verse 18, of the rock who begot you, you are unmindful, and have forgotten the God who fathered you. They scornfully esteemed the Lord, and they forgot Him. They provoked Him to jealousy with foreign gods. Verse 16, with abominations they provoked Him to anger. They did that. God is the rock, and the rock gives goodness, but they treated Him scornfully and they forgot Him. And now look a little bit further down. It's verse... Let's see. Let's look in verse... I want to see where I want to start reading. Let me get back. Pardon me. Looking at my own notes. Starting in verse 28. For they are a nation void of counsel, nor is there any understanding in them. Oh, that they were wise, that they understood this, that they would consider their latter end. How could one chase 1,000, and two put 10,000 to flight, unless their rock had sold them, and the Lord had surrendered them? For their rock is not like our rock, even our enemies themselves being judges. For their vine is of the vine of Sodom and the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are grapes of gall. Their clusters are bitter. Their wine is the poison of serpents and the cruel venom of cobras. But it's that phrase there. How could this happen unless their rock had sold them? And you have this contrast between two rocks. Because God is the rock, and God gives goodness. The rock gives goodness. But they had scorned and forgotten the Lord their refuge, the Lord their rock. And so their rock sold them. The Lord surrendered them. And then you look a little bit further down. Look at verse 36. Verse 35, vengeance is mine, and recompense. For the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things come to hasten upon them. For the Lord will judge His people, and have compassion on His servants, when He sees that their power is gone, and there is no one remaining bond or free. He will say, where are their gods? The rock in which they sought refuge, right? Who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offerings? Let them rise up and help you and be your refuge. Now see that I, even I, am He, and there is no God besides me. I kill and make alive. I wound and I heal, nor is there any who can deliver from my hand. It couldn't have happened unless the Lord turned them over. Unless, to use the phrase here, unless their rock had sold them. That's the only way that God's people ever fell, if God allowed it to happen, that He allowed it to happen. And that's what happened. But this picture of this different rock, and I just thought it was interesting, for their rock is not like our rock. And yet, who do people turn to? People turn to the rock of the world. They turn to the gods of this present age. They turn away from Jehovah our rock, and they turn to some other rock. And then they wonder why God sells them. They wonder why things are happening. And it's because they have turned their back on the Lord. And they have turned aside to their rock. Is what it looks like. Now, you might notice in this chapter, if you read it, Rejoice, O Gentiles, verse 43. Rejoice, O Gentiles, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants and render vengeance to his adversaries. He will provide atonement for his land and his people. Moses came with Joshua the son of Nun, spoke all the words of this song in the hearing of the people. Moses finished speaking all these words to all Israel. And he said to them, Set your hearts on all the words which I testify among you today, which you shall command your children to be careful to observe, all the words of this law. For it is not a futile thing for you, because it is your life. And by this word you shall prolong your days in the land which you cross over the Jordan to possess. And the Lord spoke to Moses that very same day, saying, and we know what he says, Moses is not crossing over. This is Moses' parting speech, one of them. And history repeats itself. As they had spurned, as they had turned away from the Lord, it would happen again. And the same holds true. But I wanted to close with that verse 43. That verse is quoted in Romans. That verse is quoted in Romans. Rejoice, O Gentiles, with his people. So this doesn't just pertain to those people. This does not just pertain to Israel as it crosses the Jordan. It doesn't even just pertain to them when they would turn away from the Lord, go into captivity. It did not just pertain to them as they fell in the wilderness. It pertained all the way to the new covenant. And this picture of as they provoke the Lord unto jealousy. And actually, let me read another verse here in chapter 32. Look at it's around verse 20. Look at the language that is used. Verse 21. They have provoked me to jealousy by what is not God. They have moved me to anger by their foolish idols. But I will provoke them to jealousy by those who are not a nation. I will move them to anger by a foolish nation. That is also the gospel going to the Gentiles. Or at least it pertains to that. So anyway, somewhat of a sad account, but it's the truth. There are sad aspects of it, but at the same time, we recognize that God is good and that God is the rock, and we don't turn away from him. We draw near unto God, and he will draw near unto us. That's what we are called to do, and that's what God's people have always been called to do, and to not scorn him. He is the rock of our salvation. So I hope this brief look into God's Word been helpful for you today. Appreciate you joining us in these daily studies. Hope you're having a good day, and we hope you join us next time.